When you talk about African countries with the longest-serving president, Cameroon should be at the top. The Central African country has one of the highest literacy rates on the continent, but its economic progress has been hampered by corruption and decades of authoritarian rule. Created in 1961 by the unification of a British and a French colony, the modern state of Cameroon has also struggled to find peace and unity. So far since its creation in 1960 till date, it has been led by two presidents, Amadou Ahidjo, who ruled from 1960 to 1982, and Paul Biya from 1982 to the present. Let's talk about the second longest consecutively serving current non-royal national leader in the world and the oldest head of state in the world, Paul Biya. The rise to power of Paul Biya. In January 1964, Paul Biya was appointed director of the cabinet of the Minister of National Education, and in July 1965, he was made Secretary General of the Ministry of National Education. In December 1967, he was appointed director of the President's Civil Cabinet, and in January 1968, he was named Secretary General of the Presidency. While continuing to serve as Secretary General of the President, he was appointed Minister in August 1968 and Minister of State in June 1970. On June 30, 1975, he was elected Prime Minister of Cameroon following the establishment of a unitary state in 1972. The Prime Minister was named as the President's legal successor by a new law that went into effect in June 1979. On 6 November 1982, following the resignation of President Ahidjo, Paul Biya rose to the highest office. In his first months as president, thanks to his promises of democracy and clemency for political prisoners, his popularity was huge, especially amongst youths. Then in 1984, the Presidential Guard attempted a coup. From that moment on, Biya began to become more authoritarian and ruthless. Repression was merciless. Hundreds of people were killed, especially in the north of Cameroon. Former President Ahidjo, considered an accomplice to the putschists, was sentenced to death in absentia. Biya in power. Since 1960, the year of independence, all the power in Cameroon has been in the hands of the president, who is also the leader of the only party, Cameroon's People Democratic Movement, CPDM. In addition to being an extreme centralizer, Paul Biya is also a deadbeat king. He doesn't work much, but he travels a lot abroad, accompanied by a court of ministers and assistants, especially in Switzerland, where he stays at one of the most luxurious hotels in Geneva at the expense of the Cameroonian people. The Council of Ministers meets only 3 to 4 times a year, and so decisions are made very slowly. This way of governing has led the country to ruin. In 1980, Cameroon was the 4th largest producer of cocoa, had a very high growth rate, 13% in 1981, and was considered a middle-income country. Since 1986, it has become a country with many poor people, terrible infrastructures, and a very high rate of corruption. In 1988, Transparency International rated Cameroon as the most corrupt country in the world. The streets are in terrible condition. Few of the main roadways have been asphalted, and most of the streets are just dirt roads. Biya was impermissibly chosen to lead the CNU after it changed its name to the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement in Bamenda in 1985. On April 24, 1988, he was also re-elected as Cameroon's president. Before deciding to recognize opposition groups in 1990, Biya originally took several efforts to open up the regime. Biya received roughly 40% of the vote in the first multi-party presidential election, which was conducted on October 11, 1992, according to official data. A runoff was not allowed, and the opposition was unable to unify around a single candidate. Officially, John Frundi of the Social Democratic Front, SDF, the opposition party, came in second with around 36% of the vote. The opposition, who claimed fraud, vigorously disputed the findings. Biya was re-elected in the presidential election of October 1997 with 92.6% of the vote. He took office on November 3 after the major opposition parties boycotted the ballot. He was re-elected in the CPDM's third extraordinary conference on July 21, 2006, and the party's second extraordinary convention on July 7, 2001. He has constantly been chosen to serve as the organization's national president. Despite the opposition's renewed claims of extensive fraud, Biya officially won a second 7-year term on October 11, 2004, receiving 70.92% of the vote. He was inaugurated on November 3, 2004. After winning re-election in 2004, Biya was prevented from competing for president again in 2011 due to a 2-term limit in the 1996 Constitution. Nevertheless, he tried to change this to allow him to do so. Biya backed constitutional reform in his 2008 New Year's message, arguing that restricting people's freedom of choice was anti-democratic. Violence-filled rallies in late February 2008 included complaints against the proposed elimination of term limits. However, on April 10, 2008, the National Assembly decided to amend the Constitution to eliminate term restrictions. The move was overwhelmingly adopted with 157 votes in favor and 5 votes against due to the CPDM's domination of the National Assembly. The 15 SDF deputies chose to skip the vote out of protest. The modification also guaranteed that the president would not be held accountable for his decisions made while in office. Riots that broke out in February 2008 demanded reduced pricing and Paul Biya's resignation as president. With claims of 100 deaths and thousands of arrests, the protesters were violently suppressed. With 77.9% of the vote in the presidential election of October 2011, Biya won a 6th term in office. With 10% of the vote, John Frundi was his closest rival. In his acceptance address, Biya vowed to turn the country into a giant construction site by implementing a program of public works that would stimulate growth and create jobs. He was sworn in to serve as president for a 2nd term on November 3, 2011. With 71.3% of the vote, Biya won the 2018 presidential election. Low voter turnout and violent crime tainted the election. He has been in charge since June, making him the longest-serving non-royal head of state as of 2022. At the beginning of the 1990s, poverty and authoritarianism drove the population to rebel. They began to strike and cause civil disobedience, the so-called Operation Vils Morts in English, ghost town operations. As a result of popular pressure, in 1992 Biya pretended to open up to a multi-party system and called for presidential elections. The official results saw the outgoing president victorious with 40% of the vote against 36% of the main candidate of the opposition. Election fraud was evident, and the opposition protested in vain. In 1997, the opposition boycotted the elections and Biya got 92.6% of the votes. The Cameroonian dictator was elected again in 2004 with 70.9% of the vote. Opening up to a multi-party system was only for appearance's sake. In reality, Biya created hundreds of small parties that he secretly controlled with the aim of weakening the opposition. Freedom of press is practically inexistent. Public television is controlled with an iron fist by the president's men, and the few existing newspapers are often censored if they dare attack the government. The judiciary is not an independent body because judges are nominated directly by the president, and political opposers are persecuted or arrested. In 2007, Biya announced his plan to revise the constitution, where the biggest change was eliminating the limit of 2 presidential mandates. In February 2008, a popular revolt erupted against this plan. Repression was brutal. Hundreds of protesters were killed and thousands were arrested. In 2008, the constitutional revision was voted on by the National Assembly, and in 2011, Biya was re-elected with 78% of the vote. The American ambassador to Cameroon, Robert Jackson, reported many irregularities, but the Supreme Court rejected the claims lodged by the opposition and confirmed the dictator's victory. By then, it was clear that Paul Biya would be president for life. In July 2018, despite his 85 years, Biya announced his intention to run for the October 7 election. The opposition chose Maurice Kamto, born in 1954 in Bafoussam, to run against him. In October, Biya was proclaimed the winner with 71.28% of the vote, but Kamto contested the results and proved, thanks to his team of lawyers, that the elections had been rigged. In response, on 26 January 2019, the leader of the opposition was arrested along with about 200 activists from his party. He was detained for several months until 5 October 2019. In September 2020, Maurice Kamto was put in house arrest. His home is under surveillance by uniformed men armed to the hilt, and no one can exit or enter. Confrontations and challenges. When Biya took over power from Mahijo, he inherited some economic instabilities, such as the Boko Haram crisis in the northern part. Among these, he also faced rejection from the people, while other challenges date back to historical events, for which Biya refused to grant the request of the citizens, leading to the Anglophone crisis. The Anglophone crisis. In 2020, the conflict between the separatists of Ambazonia, an Anglophone region that self-declared independence in 2017, and the Cameroonian government led to civil war. Over 6,000 people were killed and 70,000 people fled their land. According to Abongwa Harrison Kang, vice president of Ambazonia, who lives in exile in Italy, a veritable genocide took place with the deaths of almost 15,000 people. One of the most serious events occurred on 14 October 2020 in an elementary school. In the city of Kumba, 8 children were killed by armed men in civilian clothes. The situation was of such concern that Pope Francis sent Cardinal Parolin to Cameroon on a reconciliation mission. The Vatican Secretary of State was in Cameroon for 6 days, from January 29th to February 3rd, 2021. President Biya announced the start of a national conversation, a series of nationwide sessions intended at resolving the Anglophone conflict amid rising violence and in response to persistent foreign pressure. The dialogue resulted in the adoption of a special status for the 2 Anglophone regions, as well as the release of hundreds of political prisoners, including opposition leader Maurice Kamto of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement and other individuals detained in connection with the unrest in the northwest and southwest regions. As a result, the regions were characterized by killings, destruction of property, and torture by government forces. The Anglophone crisis recorded many deaths, and the destruction of houses and roads. People left the comfort of their homes to the bushes, and others who could migrate to different towns were able to do so. It also delayed the construction of the Kumba, Mundemba Road in the southwest, and the Nkamba Road in the northwest regions. Authorities declared in May that they were looking into reports that security personnel had set at least 70 homes on fire in Mankan, Bamenda, on May 15. They also announced the creation of a commission of inquiry to assess the material damage and lost property. The commission was required to submit its report by May 24, but the results have not been made public by the authorities. The government refused to let a Human Rights Watch researcher enter the nation on April 12 in what appears to be an effort to stop claims of abuse by its security personnel. Human Rights Watch made multiple attempts to get the government to provide an explanation, but had not yet received any information on the reasons behind the decision to obstruct access. In conclusion, it is unacceptable that a president stays in power for 38 years. Without political alternatives, there is no democracy or respect for human rights. France has a great political and moral responsibility because, for the past 38 years, all French presidents have unconditionally supported the dictator Biya, one of the most corrupt men in the world. If you found this content interesting, leave your comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to this channel for more educative discoveries about Africa. Thanks for staying with us till the end. We hope to see you in our next video.